Helio was in the leading edge of everything. He was ready for anything, until the fight he had with Kimura. He fought the first round of 10 minutes, and Kimura could not defeat him. In the third minute of the second round, Kimura got him in an arm lock, and Carlos threw in the towel. Kimura wanted to take Helio to Japan. He said he never thought that a fighter existed in the world with that kind of class. It was Helio. He was the kingpin. The creator of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Man, as far as I know, I am the creator. Give me a break. Some people say that Carlos Gracie introduced Jiu-Jitsu to Brazil. It wasn't Carlos Gracie who introduced it. The introduction of Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil was done by Count Koma, Maeda Koma, a Japanese man who during a tour around the world stopped in Pará, Belém do Pará, and settled over there as a chief of a Japanese immigration colony. He developed a relationship with my father, who had influence with politicians. And with that story of Jiu-Jitsu being good, my brother Carlos was part of a group of students that the Japanese had. In other words, Carlos was a student of Count Koma. With the passing of time, my father, after the death of my grandfather, came to Rio de Janeiro. Carlos came along and he did not have a specific profession. To his friends, however, he would say Jiu-Jitsu was a very efficient art that could do this and that. He got a group of friends from the Bank of Brazil and started teaching them classes. He tried doing a few fights because the word got out that he knew how to fight. He did a couple of fights against a couple of individuals. One was at the YMCA against a very strong black guy that didn't know anything, and Carlos could not defeat the guy. He wasn't really a competitor. He was more of a technician that knew some moves. The jiu-jitsu that he knew was not enough to defeat a black fighter. After that, he had another match with Manuel Rufino dos Santos. Again, he did not win. It was a draw. At this time, I was already starting, and so was my brother, Jorge. He decided to get Carlos out of the fighting business because the jiu-jitsu that he knew was not up to date. I did not know much, and they did not teach me. I used to sit and watch Carlos teaching class. I used to have a problem with vertigo and ended up getting out of school because I would faint every day. There was a big confusion. I convinced my mother to let me stop studying. Then, for lack of something to do, I would watch my brother teach class. I did not have a special motivation to teach classes, nor thought that Jiu-Jitsu was what it is today. And with this, after a year and a half, I became a little parrot. I knew everything by heart, not only the questions, but also the answers, the advice he would give, etc. As a matter of fact, I must tell you, Carlos was like a second father to me because my father had separated from my mother and went to São Paulo, and I, at 13 years old, went to live with Carlos. From 13 to 16, watching him teach classes, I learned the jiu-jitsu stuff, the things he used to say, etc. I was never too excited about the moves because the things I saw were not of major importance for me, but I memorized everything. One fine day, he was late for a class and a student arrived, the director of the Bank of Brazil, and I said, "Look, Dr. Mario, Carlos is not here. Would you like me to teach you a class? Go through the program?" And he said, "Sure, let's go play." When Carlos arrived, Mario said, "I already had a class. You don't have to apologize. From now on, if you don't mind, I'm going to have classes with Helio." Carlos was not much of a hard worker. Actually, he liked the idea because there was one less student he had to teach, so I started teaching for him. He started giving me his students, and in the end, he wasn't teaching anymore. I had a problem. As a matter of fact, more than one problem. First, I knew everything by heart. I knew how to explain and say the words, but I didn't feel comfortable doing the moves because I could not adapt to the way he was applying the techniques. So I started to adapt Jiu-Jitsu to me. creating a jiu-jitsu that was a little different. Better yet, a lot different. I started honing it and made a jiu-jitsu just for myself. And this jiu-jitsu started giving me an increased efficiency. One day, this guy showed up very strong, Edgar Santos Rocha. I was a young man, about 16. Santos Rocha arrived and Carlos had me spar with him. When I threw him, he was a heavy man, almost 220 pounds, 195 pounds. I fell and the man choked me from behind. I was turned belly up on top of him and the guy was choking me. I was turning purple. He crossed his legs and I gave him a leg lock and he tapped out. Carlos was very impressed with my victory and sometime later got me another fight against a boxer. And that's how I started my fighting career. Then Carlos got married to a young woman who became the mother of Carlson, Robson, all this little group that I raised. At this time, Carlos was not even wearing a gi anymore, except to introduce me in public. He became my public relations, my manager. From that point on, I kept honing my technique that today is the one that dominates the world. And my son, Helio, with the UFC in the United States, which gave our system tremendous publicity so that the whole world now wants to learn Jiu-Jitsu. And everybody in Brazil wants to move to the United States to sleep in the bed that Helio has made. Carlos was my manager. And he knew I did not like to tap out. He told me, I will only allow you to fight Kimura if you promise that if he catches you with a good move, you will tap out. I agreed. If he caught me with a good move, I would tap out. Although he knew I did not like the idea of tapping out. Somewhere in the middle of the fight, during the second round, Kimura was able to catch me sideways. He was very strong. Because we fought for about a round and a half, and in the second round he got me sideways, almost on my back, and crossed both legs above my waist. He was choking my neck and I was blocking with one hand. With his leg, he was squeezing my ribs. With this pressure, I could not breathe. I wanted to breathe, but my lungs could not expand. I felt I was going to pass out because I couldn't breathe, and I remembered the promise I made. And I thought to myself, this is not a good technique. I'm not going to tap. If it was a clean move, like an arm lock or a choke, I would tap out. But it's not. I decided not to tap and then I passed out. He used a lot of strength and he was already getting tired. And eventually had to let go. When released, my lungs inhaled. I was able to breathe and woke up. When I woke up, he was already mounted on top of me and complimenting me. You're good. I didn't say a word, kept defending myself, and he attacked. The fight went on. Then he caught me in an arm lock, the same one it felt like he had caught me in about 10 or 15 times. And I had been able to escape, but I was already getting tired. And Carlos worried that I might not tap with this arm lock. Carlos threw in the towel. At the time, I decided not to tap because that was not a clean technique. I was embarrassed to say that I tapped because of some pressure on my tummy. When I fought Kimura, the local press was against it because I already had defeated the number 2 man in the world. But I wanted to have a feel for the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. I didn't fight because I wanted the fame of winning, since I knew I couldn't defeat Kimura. I was about 42. Did not have the stamina of youth, but I wanted to experience the type of Jiu-Jitsu he knew, since he was the best in Japan. When the fight was over, I was convinced that they were beginners in comparison to my Jiu-Jitsu. This Jiu-Jitsu that I know enables me to say that anyone who does it as I do, or as my sons do it, cannot be beaten unless by accident. If tomorrow there's a fight against Mike Tyson or Holyfield out of 100 fights, you can lose one or two, but you win 98 or 99. I challenge Joe Louis. Let's say he hits me with one punch in my back. He would throw me 60 feet away. But the certainty that he would not hit me moved me to challenge him, and he would not accept this fight. So in order to beat us, either you have to know our jiu-jitsu, the jiu-jitsu I adapted, or hope for an accident. There is no way that the Boxing Federation would ever permit a fight. It's not that a top boxer wouldn't fight, because to get to the top, he has to be courageous and efficient. So, the reason is not that they would be afraid. Due to the tremendous popularity of no-holds-barred fighting, if boxing steps in and loses, its prestige will lose 80% in popularity, and boxing is a huge source of income. There's absolutely no way they would permit this. That's why in the United States there is a huge campaign against no-holds-barred events, due to the tremendous amount of interest in no-holds-barred fighting in general. It is so big that they are afraid that this success could surpass the popularity that boxing has as a sport. I still teach classes, and it's not just anybody who can make me tap. You know, I'll give a lot of people headaches. The jiu-jitsu that I developed was not a sport for competition. I was never a competitor. I was always a wimp, a weak man weighing 140 pounds. I never had the physical attributes to develop a sport for competition. Every competitor is an athlete. I'm no athlete. However, I created the Jiu-Jitsu Federation so that Jiu-Jitsu could have an official forum, giving some people the ability to compete, put my art on the map officially. My Jiu-Jitsu, however, is an art of self-defense. It's for the real street fights. It's to protect the individual, the older man, the weak, the child, the lady and the young woman from being dominated and getting hurt by some bum because they don't have the physical attributes to defend themselves like I never had. Therefore, I developed a jiu-jitsu that would focus on physical efficiency for self-defense. Brazil is the world center for jiu-jitsu champions. All the best jiu-jitsu fighters in the world are Brazilians. In addition to my sons, who are better than all the others, we have lots of good fighters here in Brazil who can go all over the world with the jiu-jitsu they know, and they are going to defeat everybody. But they went to the United States, and they all lost in the no-holds-barred, because the jiu-jitsu they do is the sport of jiu-jitsu, not the one for the street fighting. This jiu-jitsu, they never learned because, as the saying goes, you should not throw pearls to the swine or try to teach the cat's jump to a bear. That's why my sons are the only ones who know this jiu-jitsu that works in a street fight. This jiu-jitsu combines the sport technique with the fighting technique. Here in Brazil now, everybody does jiu-jitsu with rules and time limits. How can I fight a man much stronger than I for 5-10 minutes if I'm weak and he is strong? I have to wait for him to get tired so I can defeat him. Who is a better fighter? I, who can make him tap in half an hour, or he that wins by points in 5 minutes because the timekeeper or somebody with a pen says that he scored more points. The winner is the one that wins the real fight, which is what we do. That's why our fights have no time limits, because we fight opponents with a huge weight difference. They will get tired because they do not have the technique. We wait long enough and then defeat them. I usually say, I never beat anybody. They're the ones that lost. I have 3 sons who are world champions, Rickson, Royce, and Royler. Technically, in jiu-jitsu, there is nobody in the world who can beat them. Carlos practically raised me because at 13 years old, I went to live with him, and thanks to him, I evolved very much, morally and spiritually. He was a great counselor because he was a very level-headed individual. He was not a hard worker, but in any case, he was a thinker, a very spiritually involved person. And with that, he disconnected himself from material things and people. Then I sort of took command of the whole family. The money he had, I distributed to the family. It was mine and his. I had his total confidence and handled everything outside of his spiritual activities because he disconnected himself from everything and everyone. Carlos was a very courageous man. Although he was a philosopher, he was courageous as hell. I don't quite recall how many fights I had. I would say about 15, more or less. If you count all fights like everybody else does, including Hickson, who says he has 400 fights, if you count like that, I have 1 million, because for the last 6 years, I've been teaching Jiu-Jitsu with about 20 to 30 students a day. If you multiply that, it would be more than 1 million. Hickson, for example, fought twice in Brazil, and the rest of his fights were in Japan. I don't know if there were 3, 4, or 5. The rest that everybody likes to count that adds to 400 or 500 are tournament matches, amateur fights, little kids' plays, and I don't count those as fights. The guys are starving in Brazil, and Royce and Horion open a fabulous door, which are the doors to the United States, where for everybody, minimum wage is about 1,000 or 2,000. Here, it's 100. Anybody who's starving goes over there, and even panhandling can make the salary you can make in Brazil. So this invasion that is moving to the United States is natural, because Brazilians, as you know, are very tricky. They always want to take advantage of everything. With this idea, any way they can leech on, they will. And Horion, with this tournament that he did, the UFC, and Royce's victories, and now Hickson, gave a lot of publicity for our Jiu-Jitsu. I say our, because what I learned from Carlos Gracie was the Japanese version. This, for me, doesn't count. It served as a basis for me to use as a guideline. But the Jiu-Jitsu that revolutionized the world is the Jiu-Jitsu that I and my sons practice. And Horion has the world's biggest academy in the United States. And there is the Jiu-Jitsu that I like, that I want, and that I created. So everybody wants to go over there. It's only natural. They're starving here. They go over there and open up a school, and with the desire the whole world has to learn Jiu-Jitsu. What's happening is that anybody who gets there and puts Jiu-Jitsu over their door will generate a lot of curiosity. Everybody's going to try to learn, even if the Jiu-Jitsu is not good, but they're going to test it. So they're testing every kind of Jiu-Jitsu because they want to get where we are. And thank God, they're never going to get there. Everybody now is selling red belts, blue belts, all kinds of degrees, and selling certificates. Didn't you see Carlson's son is selling a certificate in the United States? To anyone who buys 4 or 5 of his tapes, he'll give a certificate as an instructor. What else do you want? Is there a bigger con artist than this? And he's a Gracie, son of Carlson Gracie, and they're selling it. The American people who are innocent are excited with the work that Horion has done with Jiu-Jitsu, and buy this stuff, think they are going to learn with it. They're actually doing a job in a way good for us, because they are teaching it wrong, and people that learn that way are never going to get where we are. If you look at it this way, it's good. But this kind of dishonesty, I do not approve of. I already elected Horion my representative in all areas. Not only because he's my oldest son, but because he's the one who is more dedicated to Jiu-Jitsu for what Jiu-Jitsu is and the way I like it. He is a level-headed man, and sometimes people call him radical. But I'm more radical than he is. As a matter of fact, I think he's very tolerant. There are things he does that I would not do. But anyway, he's the only man that follows my guidelines the way I want, and that makes me happy. So I elected him a while back, the only individual who can certify instructors while I'm alive and after I die. To the decent citizen, to the executive, to children, to women, and to every weak individual who wants to learn self-defense or martial arts, we will teach everything we know. We will teach everything I know in 50 classes. All you have to do is pay the price and commit to the learning. Let's not confuse this student with those presumptuous ones who want to become teachers, because my own sons, who are born with me and since 3 years old have been doing Jiu-Jitsu, only got their certificates after practicing their teaching skill for 10 years. Now an individual comes by my academy, spends 5 or 6 months or a year, and then leaves calling himself a Jiu-Jitsu teacher. There's no way. Because for me, the instructor skill is not the learning of the movements. It's in the philosophy behind the movements. In Brazil, unfortunately, it's very difficult to find someone with the morals that I expect to become an instructor at my academy. That's the problem. Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil was only learned through me, because Carlos Gracie never put a gi on to teach class to anyone, especially to his sons. When his children were born, I was already teaching classes instead of him, better than him, and not one of them learned from him. So this is the deal. To know Jiu-Jitsu is one thing. Be able to pass it on is another. I wish the children of Carlos were able to put up with my radical approach and my demanding, exaggerated, and honest way of working. For convenience and other reasons, as time went by, they moved on and opened their own schools, teaching their own way. If they could not keep up with me, with my working habits, my way of thinking, imagine everyone else. Royce, who said that the best in the family was my youngest daughter because she could get anything out of me while the others couldn't. Every teacher of Jiu-Jitsu that does not have my certificate is not a Jiu-Jitsu teacher, because I know that they do not teach the stand-up self-defense, either because they don't know it or because they think it's too much work. The ones in the United States should continue with Helio and his academy, because they are not going to find anywhere else what they can find there. I owe everything to Jiu-Jitsu. I was a weak kid, temperamental, nervous, and with complexes. I couldn't stand for someone to even look at me on the street. I wanted to be courageous, and I thought that to be courageous, I shouldn't be afraid to fight. What happened is that when I learned Jiu-Jitsu, I stopped fighting. I learned to believe in myself and became a more tolerant kid. I'm apparently a tolerant man because the self-control that Jiu-Jitsu gave me was such that today I come across as a saint. When the people start to compliment me very much, I usually tell them that I'm the worst individual that I've ever met. I'm like the devil. I have all the bad qualities that you can imagine. But thanks to Jiu-Jitsu, to the confidence that it instilled in me, I believe in myself so much that I think it would be unfair for me to even raise my voice to someone. Because the sense of security is so great that I think it would be unfair to take advantage of it. So, Jiu-Jitsu changed me morally and emotionally in so many different ways that my gratitude to Jiu-Jitsu is tremendous. That is why I'm a fanatic for it, and I love my students because when I teach, I fulfill myself through my student. I want to see him just like me, morally and physically. Because what you see sometimes is an individual that considers himself courageous, fighting and beating people up, while for me, every person that fights all the time is a coward. He is afraid. He is insecure. That's why he fights. Because a man at peace, confident, with or without Jiu-Jitsu, with or without the strength, when he is confident in himself morally, he dominates the adversary with his moral strength, not with his physical power. Physical power is a complement for when a person is not morally evolved. He will rely on the physical strength. So Jiu-Jitsu for this kind of person is a great equalizer. If today I come across as a nice guy, a calm, friendly, decent individual, I owe it all to Jiu-Jitsu, my friends.